All right, let's dive right into this explainer and take a virtual tour of Halloween Horror Nights 1996. We are heading back to a truly pivotal year, branded as Journey into Fear. And honestly, this is the year that completely changed the landscape of immersive entertainment forever.
Here's the roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the 1996 Journey into Fear. Then we'll walk through the three houses of horror, brave the midway of the bazaar, check out the shows and unsolved mysteries, hit the rides after dark, and finally look at HHN Beyond Orlando.
Section 1. The 1996 Journey into Fear. To really understand 96, you've got to understand the hype. There was an absolutely unprecedented mainstream media blitz this year featuring Frankenstein's monster, giving the classic icon massive national visibility. And right alongside him was the de facto ruler of the event, our underworld host, the Crypt Keeper, who was, quite frankly, everywhere.
Now, 15. This number is absolutely huge. For the first time ever, Universal completely broke the traditional Halloween calendar boundary. They extended the event to a record-breaking 15-night run that actually stretched all the way into November. It proved that the demand for high-level horror was way larger than anyone originally anticipated.
And looking at the core stats, you can see the formula really starting to solidify. With a very modest $1.50 bump in the average ticket price, they were building the exact blueprint for what we now call the transition era of the event. It was growing, yet it remained incredibly accessible.
Moving on to Section 2, Three Houses of Horror. Let's head into the dark corners of the park and see how this builds into three uniquely terrifying haunted houses.
First up is Universal's new House of Horrors. The setup here was brilliant. A freak lightning strike basically animated two totally distinct wax museum exhibits. It perfectly illustrates a contrast in terror. So on side A, you had the beloved Golden Age monsters, capitalizing on that massive Frankenstein media push. But on side B, you stepped into visceral true crime terror, coming face to face with the likes of Jack the Ripper and a bloody Lizzie Borden lunging right out of a closet at you.
Since this was housed inside Soundstage 22, the creative team had absolute total control over the environment. I mean, it was pitch black in there. And what really set the tone was the cue itself. You were forced to listen to this deeply unsettling, looping DJ remix of Here Comes the Bride before even walking in. That sensory manipulation made the sudden shock scares inside incredibly effective.
Our next stop is Toy Hell Nightmare in the Scream Factory. And wow, you had to endure a seriously horrifying progression here. You'd start in the bloody cobbling room, complete with surgeon saws, a demonic clown, and a shrieking creature bursting from a hanging corpse under strobe lights. From there, you'd face a literal clown car meat grinder, try to survive the claustrophobic toy pile room, and finally encounter the loud, siren-blaring wrath of Old Man Nazarman himself.
This all went down behind the New York streets backlot and Nazaraman's facade. And what's wild is how they weaponize pure childhood iconography right against you in this deliberately low-lit environment. It really pushed the boundaries of absurdity and gore, proving that something as simple as a doll or a toy robot could become pure nightmare fuel if they staged it just right.
And finally, we've got the Crypt Keeper's Studio Tour of Terror. You're navigating a dual-environment backlot and soundstage right in the massive earthquake attraction queue. The Crypt Keeper guided you through these in-production horror sets populated by maniacs, slashers, and the infamous Rat Lady. It was this brilliant meta-humorous take on a theme park studio tour gone horribly wrong.
Section 3, The Midway of the Bazaar. So, you step out of the houses and think you're safe, right? Well, think again.
Because the entire Amity area was completely transformed into the midway of the bazaar. This was an oppressive, nightmarish traveling carnival. Garish, disorienting lighting and the twisted sounds of sinister circus music scrambled your senses at every single turn, leaving you highly vulnerable to an ambush.
You were literally surrounded by aggressive killer clowns wielding giant razors and mallets, crazed sideshow freaks, and of course, the roaring motors of the iconic chainsaw drill team. But here's the craziest detail of the whole setup. You could actually win real prizes at the interactive game booths while actively fighting for your life against these roaming scare actors. No way you see that kind of thing today.
Let's jump into Section 4. Shows and unsolved mysteries. A crucial thing to remember about this era is that live entertainment was just as vital as the scares themselves.
First up, we have the historic debut of the Crypt Keepers Festival of the Dead Parade. Born directly out of the park's massive Mardi Gras success, this new tradition filled the streets with 5 ghoulish floats, stilt walkers, and Halloween-themed bead throws, all marching to a primal, unsettling tribal soundscape. It was an instant classic. Meanwhile, over at the Wild West stage, Bill and Ted's Excellent Halloween Adventure was delivering a perfect, hilarious 1996 pop culture time capsule. Audiences absolutely lost their minds watching Ethan Hunt from Mission Impossible drop from the ceiling and Captain Stephen Hiller, Will Smith's character from Independence Day, rapping on stage to help defeat the cigarette-smoking man from The X-Files.
But alright, here is where we hit a genuine true crime theme park mystery. The beloved Price is Fright game show hosted by Beetlejuice was heavily advertised in newspapers. Beetlejuice even gave press interviews for it. Yet abruptly, right before opening night, it was entirely canceled without a single word of public explanation.
According to historian notes, it was swapped out at the very last second for a hastily assembled, totally unadvertised hypnotist show called Tricks, Treats, and Trances. Was it a licensing dispute? A major creative clash? To this day, the sudden cancellation of Beetlejuice's signature game show remains one of the greatest enduring mysteries in all of HHN history.
Section 5. Rides After Dark. So while the monsters absolutely owned the streets, the park's massive daytime infrastructure kept humming along at full capacity.
Guests had this insane, rapid-fire list of pure 90s nostalgia available to them. You could literally jump onto legendary and now extinct attractions like Kongfrontation, the Ghostbusters Spooktacular, Jaws, and Back to the Future. Honestly, having access to these massive rides right alongside the intense horror content added immense value to that $1.50 ticket increase we talked about earlier. Finally, Section 6, HHN Beyond Orlando. To really wrap our heads around how special 96 was, we've got to zoom out a bit and look at the rest of the Universal Parks globe. Look at the timeline here, because the coast-to-coast disparity is massive. While Orlando was firing on all cylinders with that record-breaking 15-night run, Hollywood was really struggling. They tried and failed in the 80s and early 90s, and in 96, they only managed a small, unsuccessful haunted house experiment at City Walk called the Chamber of Chills. Hollywood's true event wouldn't even launch until a full year later. And remember, Universal Studios Japan and Singapore? Yeah, they didn't even exist yet. So the reality is stark. If you wanted the premier, large-scale, immersive horror experience in October of 1996, Orlando, Florida was quite literally the only place on Earth you could find it. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to just marvel at this transition era. Look at that perfect balance of terror and entertainment they achieved. You have to ask yourself, how did the unsolved mysteries, the brilliant mainstream media hype, and the absolute masterclasses in single-path terror from this specific 15-night journey into fear permanently rewrite the rules for the Halloween entertainment industry we know and love today? Think about that next time you step into the fog.
Welcome back, everyone. Man, today we are opening up an absolute treasure chest of theme park history. Get ready, because we are doing an encyclopedic, leave-nothing-out deep dive into Halloween Horror Nights 7 Frightmares. We are talking 1997, folks. This was an era of massive expansion, shifting mythologies, and some truly wild pop culture synergy. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to unpack absolutely every archival detail about this transitionary year. First, we'll set the event context. Then we'll walk through the haunted houses, brave the scares and streets, catch the shows, check out the merchandise and rides, and finally, look at Hollywood's massive debut.
All right, Section 1, let's start with a ground-level overview of the event context and, of course, the mascot.
To really wrap your head around 1997, you have to look at the massive scale Universal was operating on. I mean, Frightmares expanded to a record-breaking 17-night run stretching all the way from October 3rd to November 1st, and they threw an absolute army of roughly 450 scare actors at the guests. That's actually one of the earliest specific staffing figures we have on record. Now, regarding ticket prices, they did see a modest bump of about $1.25, but here's the crazy part. Universal still kept discounted rates for kids aged 3 to 9. That is just a huge contrast to how the event operates today, right? Back then, Orlando was still positioning this thing for a surprisingly broad demographic. Now, welcome to the pre-Icon transition era. Way before Jack the Clown changed the whole game, we had Igor. He was this small, grotesque, green goblin-like creature with these huge, bulging eyes. Now, he wasn't an official icon, no formal status, no backstory, and he didn't even get his own house.
But man, Universal plastered him all over Central Florida. They ran this visceral marketing campaign, with a billboard showing him gripping an enormous eyeball in one hand and literally prying open a bleeding human eyelid with the other, all right next to the terrifying tagline, "You'll never sleep again." And amazingly, his legacy actually carried over to the West Coast, inspiring Universal Studios Hollywood's later Igor Awards for horror genre contributors. Pretty cool, right?
Moving right along to Section 2, the meticulously crafted single-path terror of the haunted houses.
Check out this brilliant tagline for Universal's Museum of Horror in Soundstage 22. The world's only museum where the guards have to warn the exhibits not to touch the visitors. It absolutely hits the nail on the head, perfectly illustrating the house's clever, subverted power dynamic. You aren't just looking at the monsters, they're looking right back at you.
So this museum was split into two totally distinct wings. On the left side, you had the classic Universal monsters, Dracula in his castle, Frankenstein's monster in his lab, the Wolfman in a moonlit forest, plus the mummy, the creature, and the bride. But then, on the right side, the whole vibe shifted to present-day horror icons, basically all the slasher legends and demons from the 80s and 90s. Being in Soundstage 22 allowed the designers total environmental control. We're talking absolute, pitch-black darkness and incredibly dramatic sound design. It also kicked off a distinct 3-year continuity arc, sandwiched perfectly between 1996's Wax Museum and 1998's Unnatural History sequel.
And we see this contrast beautifully in the other enclosed experiences that year, too. Take Hotel Hell, which took over the Nazarman's New York Streets backlot for its 5th consecutive year. You'd enter through Sting Alley into this crumbling Victorian hotel just packed with hostile ghosts, demented bellhops, violent bums, and practical bleeding walls, literally walls that bled. Plus a ruined kitchen with a murderous chef. Contrast that dilapidated setting with Tombs of Terror, built over in the earthquake queue. This one had an abandoned New Orleans funeral home facade, leading into Anne Rice-inspired above-ground tombs. It was infested with vampires, Louisiana swamp monsters, ghosts, mutants, and chainsaw maniacs. But historically speaking, the most significant thing about Tombs of Terror is that it served as the final confirmed named appearance of the legendary original event scare actor, the Rat Lady.
All right, Section 3, Scares in Streets. Let's shift our focus to the open-air terror permeating the park.
Interestingly, there was exactly one official scare zone in 1997. The Midway of the Bazaar returned to the Amity area for its 3rd year, bringing some serious fresh upgrades. Looking at the archival records, it perfectly blended a nightmarish traveling carnival aesthetic with actual functional games. You could literally step right up and try to win a prize, but with the very real risk of a terrifying sideshow freak creeping up behind you while you played ring toss.
But hey, just because there was only one named scare zone did not mean you were safe anywhere else. Universal deliberately ensured that absolutely no part of the park felt like a sanctuary. Remember those 450 roaming actors? They deployed them everywhere. The iconic chainsaw drill team was out in full force. In Amity, you faced knife-wielding clowns and horrifying sideshow acts. We're talking contortionists, fire eaters, strongmen, and tattooed threats acting as active hazards. Add in the full park environmental transformation with colored fog and creepy ambient audio, and the atmosphere was just totally suffocating.
Let's keep this moving. Section 4, the shows. Time to talk 1997 pop culture.
You guys, it is almost unbelievable how much of a time capsule this next part is. Just listen to the plot for Bill and Ted's excellent Halloween adventure on the Wild West stage. It opens with Star Trek's Captain Kirk and Picard beaming into 1880s Gotham City, where they are hunted by the Borg Queen and a Klingon. Bill and Ted show up, get chased, and use the bat signal to summon Batman, Robin, and Batgirl. Then, because it was the summer of '97, the Men in Black arrive to blow up Poison Ivy's building while Batman fights Mr. Freeze on the roof. The Men in Black shoot down the Borg Queen, and just when you think it can't get any crazier, the Back to the Future DeLorean rolls out carrying Jerry Seinfeld and Kramer. The whole thing ends with the cast fixing the time machine while dancing to Greased Lightning. It is so wildly, beautifully chaotic.
And the rest of the entertainment lineup was just as stacked. The Crypt Keeper came back for year 2 of the Festival of the Dead Parade, which had a Mardi Gras vibe with floats, stilt walkers, tribal music, and bead throws. Beetlejuice's Graveyard Review continued its beloved run of putting classic monsters into high-energy rock and roll numbers. But the big new addition was Abracadaver. Replacing 96's Tricks, Treats, and Trances, this took over the Animal Actors stage. The theme? Evil magicians pulling volunteers from the audience and subjecting them to totally demented, horror-themed stage illusions, like sawing assistants in half and levitation gone terribly wrong. Moving right along to Section 5, Merchandise and Rides. What to do and what to take home.
The 1997 catalog of collectibles is incredibly dense. Hardcore collectors still hunt for the HHN V7 Cloisonné enamel medallion, the Special Houses Pass, and the You'll Never Sleep Again Ask Me buttons worn by staff. We also have full documentation of both the general staff shirts and the main event guest shirts, plus Pepsi co-branded promotional materials. But two items really stand out as definitive archival pieces: the mysterious, pirate-themed maroon doubloon token and the highly sought-after Abracadabra Pass, which was a physical show ticket that prominently featured our green friend, Igor.
As for the rides, almost the entire park was operational. You could ride Earthquake, the big one, while its queue simultaneously hosted the Tombs of Terror House. Back to the Future the ride was running, which perfectly tied into the DeLorean finale of the Bill and Ted Show. Jaws, E.T. Adventure, Twister, Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies, and Terminator 2 3D, which had just opened in April of '96, were all operating. Also, Kongfrontation's aerial tram provided natural foot traffic feeding right into Hotel Hell. And we have to note the timely 1997 rebranding of the park's resident effects show, newly christened the Gory, Gruesome, and Grotesque Horror Makeup Show.
Now, Section 6, Hollywood's debut. We need to shift gears for a moment as we look at the West Coast expansion.
The road to a dual coast event was intensely difficult and tragically dark. The original use of the Halloween Horror Nights name was actually in Hollywood back in 1986 as a nighttime backlot tram tour. Tragically, a scare actor was crushed to death between moving tram cars, and Universal immediately canceled the event. They didn't try again until 1992, following Orlando's success, but that single-year attempt failed. In 1996, they tried a Chamber of Chills maze in City Walk, which was also unsuccessful. It wasn't until October 9, 1997, 6 days after Orlando's Frightmares opened, that Hollywood finally managed a safe, successful launch.
Tracing that timeline, Hollywood launched successfully in 1997 and ran for 4 years before taking a hiatus in 2000. It finally returned as an annual powerhouse in 2006. And to put that into perspective as a quick historical footnote, while this dual park launch in '97 was absolutely groundbreaking, international parks like Universal Studios Japan and Singapore, which host massive Halloween Horror Nights events today, didn't even exist yet. Now, the two 1997 events shared a name, but they were entirely distinct. While Orlando still sold discounted tickets for kids aged 3 to 9 and leaned heavily into the Festival of the Dead parade, full haunted houses, and the Igor mascot, Hollywood took a very different path. They immediately instituted a stricter 12 and up age recommendation. They used the term mazes instead of houses and featured no formal icons or parades. Most importantly, learning from the 1986 tragedy, they introduced the safe walk-through terror tram, where guests disembarked on the backlot rather than being attacked on moving vehicles.
Section 7, The Legacy of 1997. Let's look at how this specific year changed the brand forever.
Frightmares wasn't just another year, guys. It was a foundational pillar for the entire future of the franchise. It marked the first dual-park overlapping event between Orlando and Hollywood. It established that audiences would absolutely show up for a massive record-breaking 17-night run supported by a 450 scare actor scale. It was an emotional end of an era, with the Rat Lady's final named appearance, while simultaneously kicking off narrative continuity with the start of Universal's Museum of Horror arc. And thanks to Bill and Ted, it remains the ultimate pop culture time capsule of a very specific moment in the late 90s.
So what does this all mean? Well, I want to know, which piece of 1997 Frightmares trivia shocked you the most? Was it the sheer absurdity of the Borg Queen fighting Batman on a Wild West stage? Or was it learning about Hollywood's dark 11-year struggle to launch safely? Think about that next time you step into the fog. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into theme park history, and keep exploring.
Welcome back to another HHN Time Capsule Explainer. We're diving straight into 1998 today, which, let me tell you, was an absolute watershed year for theme park horror on both the East and West Coasts. If you're a hardcore fan of immersive terror, '98 was this monumental shift that completely redefined the whole game.
Here is a quick look at our roadmap. We're going to cover the 1998 cultural moment, Orlando's dual-path revolution, their scares and shows, Hollywood's expanding nightmares, and finally, the massive legacy of 1998. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The 1998 cultural moment. Pop culture hits, HHN.
To really wrap your head around this event, you've got to remember the absolute sheer scale of the media landscape back then.
I mean, James Cameron's Titanic was obliterating records, raking in $2.1 billion at the box office. The teen slasher boom was absolutely everywhere thanks to Scream, and Universal just so happened to be releasing Bride of Chucky right in the middle of October. You also had inescapable news stories like the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal dominating the headlines. Pop culture was basically obsessed with aliens, with the X-Files hitting its absolute peak, and oh yeah, legendary rock band Kiss made a massive comeback. These gigantic cultural moments, from blockbusters to the evening news, didn't just inspire the parks, they weaponized them for scares.
Moving right along to Section 2, Orlando's dual-path revolution, doubling the terror.
So before '98, every house was just a single linear walkthrough, right? But then came the dual-path house. And wow, this was a total game changer. Imagine a single facade and a shared entrance that splits into two entirely separate walkthrough experiences. Each path has its own narrative, its own scares. This brilliant mechanic literally doubled the number of unique experiences without taking up more space. It drastically boosted replayability and let them get incredibly ambitious with the concepts. You weren't just walking through a house anymore, you were actively choosing your own nightmare.
You could see this dual-path power firing on all cylinders right inside the earthquake queue. Guests were faced with the SS Fritanic, heavily leaning into that global Titanic obsession. You had to make a choice. Do you go left, into the claustrophobic, rusty, terrifying bowels of the ship with the Carnage crew, or do you go right, up into the ghostly, opulent upper decks for fear and first class?
Let's actually break down the anatomy of this thing. You step up to this doomed, dimension-hopping luxury liner, and right off the bat, you're dodging an undead homage to Jack and Rose at the facade. Once you're inside, the environment itself becomes the enemy. We're talking physically descending ceilings, pooling water effects, and then you have to navigate this ballroom full of air-powered mannequin dancers, except some of them are real scare actors lying in wait. The physical disorientation of an actively dropping ceiling mixed with real water, it created this incredibly visceral, cinematic terror that you just can't get from a standard jump scare.
Section 3. Orlando Scares and Shows. Beyond the Fritanic. The ambition definitely didn't stop at the Fritanic. Over in Soundstage 22, we had Universal's Museum of Horror. Path 1, the Chamber of Horrors. This showcased the classic Golden Age monsters like Frankenstein and the Wolfman, but it injected this brilliant dark humor. I mean, they literally had an unpaid electric bill written on Dr. Frankenstein's whiteboard. Now, if you chose Path 2, Unnatural History, you were thrown into a shared museum exhibit with modern, bloodier cinema slashers and genre icons from the 70s to the 90s. It was the absolute perfect choice for fans.
But they still absolutely killed it with their single-path houses, too. Let's look scene by scene at Hell's High. You walk into this dilapidated high school that's supposedly being used as a horror movie set. Suddenly, you're face to face with the mad science teacher. You survive him? Great, now you've got to get past the evil lunch ladies serving up, well, mystery meat. And then you stumble into these actively staged kill scenes in progress. It was this brilliant meta-narrative where a fictional slasher becomes real and starts attacking the film crew right in front of you. A perfectly executed, incredibly fun response to the 90s teen slasher craze.
Out in the streets, the scare zones were evolving just as fast. The midway of the bizarre scare zone brought in a serious game changer, brand new, incredibly dense fog effects. It sounds simple, right? But this fog totally masked the approaching scare actors until the absolute last terrifying second. It completely destroyed your sightlines and turned the entire Amity area into this intensely unpredictable nightmare. And balancing out all that intense terror was an absolute explosion of entertainment. The lineup was stacked. You had Bill and Ted's excellent Halloween Adventure 7, using topical humor to roast everything from Titanic to the year's political scandals. Then the Festival of the Dead Parade rolled out a brand new Bride of Chucky float. For music fans, Horrorpalooza delivered a massive Lollapalooza-inspired mainstage rock show. And if you like fire, Inferno brought this crazy pyrotechnic stunt performance. It was just this seamless integration of live movie promos and ruthlessly relevant pop culture.
But here's the absolute kicker for music fans. Orlando offered a one-night-only concert by literal rock legends Lynyrd Skynyrd, Peter Frampton, and Tommy Shaw. And guess what? It was completely free with standard admission. Let that sink in. That kind of massive amenity and incredible value has never been repeated in the event's history.
Okay, moving out to the West Coast. Section 4, Hollywood's Expanding Nightmares, a West Coast Evolution.
Hollywood didn't just sit back and copy Orlando's homework, they were carving out a totally distinct identity for their second-ever horror event. They pivoted hard into a mix of licensed intellectual properties, unique auteur horror, and ingeniously repurposing their massive daytime stunt arenas.
A perfect example of that auteur focus is Clive Barker's Freaks. The marketing promised human curiosities, unusual oddities, and freaks of nature. By putting a visionary creator like Clive Barker's name front and center on the maze, Hollywood was treating horror as an auteur art form. They were laying the groundwork right there for the filmmaker-branded experiences that are such a huge staple of the event today.
They were also leaning heavily into that 90s sci-fi paranoia. Take Alien Assault. The promo literally said, "Experience inhuman terror that would make Mulder and Scully weep." They fully exploited the peak of alien conspiracy lore, directly referencing the X-Files to drag guests into this terrifying extraterrestrial abduction scenario inside a spaceship.
And Hollywood used its massive permanent footprint to its absolute advantage. They took the permanent Waterworld stunt stage and slapped a horrifying pyrotechnic overlay on it called Slaughter World. We're talking aquatic horror and incredible stunts. On top of that, they introduced their first hard rock concert with the ultimate tribute to Kiss, turning Waterworld into Slaughter World, plus adding a Kiss cover band. It really cemented the event's new, aggressively loud rock and roll identity.
And you know they weren't going to miss out on that corporate synergy. They transformed the Insult Emporium into Chucky's Wedding Chapel, specifically adding a Tiffany doll for 1 year only. Why? To cross-promote the theatrical release of Bride of Chucky. Of course, it was this perfectly timed, hilarious, live-action tie-in to the movie playing in theaters that exact same weekend.
Finally, Section 5. The Legacy of 1998, a monumental year.
So why the number 18? It's incredibly significant. Fan reaction and demand were so overwhelmingly positive that Orlando expanded to a record-breaking 18 nights that year. The fans were just rabid for this level of immersive, adult-targeted terror, and Universal proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that they could deliver. Word of mouth spread like wildfire, proving that highly detailed, intense horror was exactly what the market was begging for. When you look back at these defining innovations, 1998 is the year that fundamentally established the unique flavors of both coasts. Orlando really leaned into massive structural and mechanical breakthroughs like the dual-path houses and those mega concerts. Meanwhile, Hollywood locked in its rock-infused, auteur-driven aesthetic with creators like Clive Barker and their massive stunt show overlays.
All of this leaves us with a pretty terrifying choice to ponder. If you were standing there at the earthquake queue back in 1998, staring down the doomed SS Frytanic, which path would you have braved? The claustrophobic terror of the Carnage crew or the ghostly opulence of fear in first class? Let that sink in. Thanks so much for exploring the time capsule with me today, and I'll catch you on the next Explainer.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are stepping right into an absolute time machine. Seriously, if you want to understand how modern-themed entertainment was shaped, you've got to look at the ultimate time capsule that captured a very specific, incredibly high-stress moment in cultural history. I'm talking about Halloween Horror Nights 1999. This was literally the final Halloween of the 20th century, and the anxiety in the air was palpable. Universal Studios brilliantly seized that collective cultural panic and channeled it into an event that fundamentally altered the trajectory of horror history forever. It's a wild ride, so let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into our methodical tour of all this pre-millennial tension. We'll kick things off with the HHN 1999 time capsule. Then we'll head down to Orlando to enter the tomb, we'll explore their mazes, scare zones, and shows, and then we'll fly over to Hollywood to break down their massive breakout year. After that, we'll talk about the entrance of Rob Zombie, which is an unbelievable story, and finally, we'll unpack the lasting legacy of The Last Gasp.
Starting right off with Section 1. The HHN 1999 time capsule, Y2K and pop culture peak.
It is honestly impossible to talk about Halloween Horror Nights 1999 without understanding the absolutely feverish cultural backdrop of that year. Both the Orlando and Hollywood parks shared the exact same subtitle for the event, Last Gasp. And that was a very intentional play on the impending millennium and the looming anxiety of Y2K. I mean, to really understand why October was so explosive, just think about the timeline leading up to it. In March, The Matrix completely revolutionized cinema. In April, the real-world tragedy of Columbine really shook the nation. May brought these massive, landscape-shifting blockbusters like The Mummy and The Phantom Menace.
Then July gave us the indie horror phenomenon The Blair Witch Project, right before The Sixth Sense dropped in August. So by the time October rolled around for HHN 1999, the public was completely overloaded with groundbreaking pop culture and deep, real-world societal anxieties. The stage wasn't just set, it was ready to explode.
Let's move on to Section 2, Orlando, Entering the Tomb, Mythology and the Mummy. Transitioning down to Universal Studios Florida, they ran their event for an impressive 19 nights. And to anchor a massive event like that, they introduced a central figure, Imhotep, fresh off the summer blockbuster The Mummy. But here's the cool part. Universal didn't just casually drop a movie character into the park. Canonical to HHN lore, Imhotep was actually resurrected by Adaru. If you don't know, Adaru is the fictional Sumerian god of fear who had been a part of the event's mythology since 1991. So Universal wove a major Hollywood IP directly into their original in-house framework. Imhotep basically acted as the first true narrative icon since the Crypt Keeper. He was this absolutely crucial bridge to the fully realized icons, like Jack the Clown, that we all know and love today.
Which brings us to Section 3, Orlando, mazes, zones, shows, dual paths, and 3D nightmares.
The physical layout of the Orlando park in 1999 was just intensely complex. They used this massive dual-path structure to completely maximize the terror for those 19 nights. For example, if you walked into the earthquake queue, you actually faced a choice. You could take Path A, Doomsday, or Path B, The Mummy. Over at Soundstage 22, the dual paths were Insanity and Psycho. And finally, tucked away in Nazarman's, was the single-path experience called Creature Features. It was like a giant puzzle. This layout was honestly an incredible feat of crowd control and immersive design. Let's actually zoom in on that first house, Doomsday, for a second, because this was an absolute masterclass in contextually charged horror. The maze was set in a post-apocalyptic, abandoned subway system directly following Y2K's imagined societal collapse. Universal directly exploited a government-endorsed real-world fear, the Y2K Millennium Bug. They literally took the very thing guests were reading about in the news, dreading in their daily lives, and turned it into a visceral zombie survival experience. Talk about hitting the nail on the head.
Now, an absolutely huge milestone happened here with the debut of Universal's Creature Features in 3D in Orlando. This was the very first 3D haunted house in HHN history. Before entering, guests were handed these super cool collectible 3D glasses styled with Frankenstein's monster stitching. Inside, Universal classic monsters literally leaped off the walls using blacklight reactive paint. And brilliantly, that 3D paint was actually used all over the park. So if you kept your glasses on while walking around, the entire environment became a multi-layered, interactive nightmare. A real game changer.
To support all these massive houses, Orlando deployed an equally massive entertainment lineup. The Midway of the Bizarre Scare Zone ran for its 5th and final consecutive year. We had incredibly fun, pop culture-heavy shows like Bill and Ted the Eighth, which prominently featured Austin Powers and Dr. Evil. Tricks or Treats, Dead Man's Party rocked the main stage. And of course, the rides were open. This included the brand new Men in Black Alien Attack, operating in its very first HHN season, right alongside classics like Jaws and T2 3D.
Let's fly over to the West Coast for Section 4, Hollywood, a breakout year. Bigger stars, bigger movies, bigger scares. While Orlando ran for 19 nights, Hollywood operated on a much more condensed 7-night schedule. But wow, did they deliver an eclectic, massive mix. They featured 5 distinct mazes spread out across both the upper and lower lots. Most notably, they introduced these things called Children's Nightmares Troops. These were roaming groups of scare actors completely themed around childhood fears. And the kicker? They weren't fixed in one location. They were proto-scare zones. This was Hollywood's vital first step toward the official scare zones they'd officially adopt the very next year. Add in the visceral Carnival of Carnage sideshow, complete with human pincushions, plus their own unique Bill and Ted script, and Hollywood was really proving to be a powerhouse all its own. Now, while Orlando really leaned into mythology and blockbusters, Hollywood was experimenting with extreme visceral body horror. A great example of this is Cleaver's Meat Locker. This was pure industrial slaughterhouse horror where bloodthirsty butchers were hacking through various cuts of meat, including human flesh. It was a cold, incredibly intense environment. And it provided a massive tonal contrast to the supernatural, mythological stuff happening over in Florida. And that leads us perfectly into Section 5. Enter Rob Zombie, a collision of music and horror.
Okay, this is one of my absolute favorite pieces of horror history.
It is time to introduce the single maze in Hollywood that arguably changed the trajectory of American horror cinema forever. I like to call it the Rob Zombie domino effect. It goes like this. Step 1, Rob Zombie collaborates with Universal Hollywood to design the thrilling, chilling world maze. Step 2, because of this awesome collaboration, Zombie wins the 3rd annual Igor Award at the event. Step 3, horror icon Bill Moseley presents that award to Zombie. Step 4, this exact sequence of events and the proven, undeniable success of the maze directly leads to Universal greenlighting Zombie's debut film, House of a Thousand Corpses, just a month later. I mean, no way, right? It's an unbelievable piece of horror history born right inside a theme park.
Wrapping things up with Section 6, The Legacy of Last Gasp, the 1999 Divergence.
Let's pull back for a second to really analyze the monumental legacy of this specific year. So what does this all mean? Well, 1999 wasn't just another successful event. Fan reception forever categorized how audiences experienced these haunts. It was the vital divergence point. Orlando realized their fans responded wildly to deep, original, in-house mythology. Imhotep literally paved the exact path for Jack the Clown. Hollywood, on the other hand, realized their local fans craved the entertainment industry connection. Their wild success with Rob Zombie and Stephen Sommers completely cemented their future as the park for celebrity and creator-driven collaborations. Looking at the big picture of how these two coasts evolved, we see Orlando anchoring itself with deep original lore like Imhotep, while simultaneously debuting massive aesthetic breakthroughs like 3D technology, tools that would become a staple of immersive design. Meanwhile, Hollywood leaned hard into its film director and heavy metal collaborations. These differing philosophies laid the foundational blueprints for practically every modern haunted attraction we walk through today.
I want to leave you with this final thought. If one single haunted maze in Hollywood in 1999 could literally launch an entire film career, and a single storyline in Orlando could birth the era of the theme park icon, what current theme park experiment is happening right now, quietly shaping the future of horror today? It's crazy to think about. Keep your eyes open the next time you're walking through the fog. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.